Hey everybody, welcome to the Friday episode of the Dobbin Bandits. I'm Orrin Phillips, and today we have a rising independent artist. We're talking about Nicholas Casbarro. He has something called Vitalerium, and it is absolutely astounding. The work he has put into this, it's, not only storytelling, but it's world creating, it's music, it's all sorts of things. This project can go so many different directions. There's videos made about it. There's a soundtrack. Nick has this wonderful, wonderful idea in his head, and he's putting it all together and is really catching on with fans. So I'm excited for you guys to hear all about this, as excited I was to talk to him about it. Here we go. Here's Nicholas Casbarro, and his project, Vitalerium. Nicholas, thank you so much for joining us.
Happy to be on the podcast. Thanks for having me.
So let's start at the very beginning. How do you discover comics and sci-fi?
Ah, well, funny enough, the comics came second.
Okay.
I started writing the book first, and the book, I mean, sci-fi itself, I've always been a fan my whole life, and so it just made sense that that was what I would write when I decided I wanted to kind of undertake this. And as I started building this really in-depth world, I got to the point where I said, well, what do I want to do with this? And the answer to that question was, I want to see it really come to life. And the next logical step for that was to turn it into, I guess, a pictorial version, which would be the comic book version. And I only really dabbled in comics when I was a kid. I used to draw comics when I was supposed to be paying attention in class. But when it came to actually purchasing comics, I didn't have a whole lot of money back in the day, so I was never really out there buying comics. Um, I was more a fan of, cinema and things like that. Whenever I could try and go see a new sci-fi movie, that was what I was trying to do. But comics is kind of a new thing for me. So I'm having like a whole second renaissance, just getting into all this stuff now that I'm, you know, basically making comics myself. So now I'm trying to see what else is out there, what else has been done. More importantly, what hasn't been done that I can try and make my own and make a little unique. And I think I've figured out a couple of things that I plan to do in the future that'll really separate Vitalarium from the rest of what's out there.
So, like you said, this is a huge undertaking. There's maps, there's characters, there's legions, there's all sorts of things going on. How do you begin this? Like, what was the first step to get this ball rolling?
So the best way that I've found to really flesh out my ideas has been to write it out long form. That's why I started with the book. Um, I I really this is kind of an amalgamation of a lot of different things. It's a mix of some ideas I've had since I was a kid, some interesting current events that I extrapolated elements from, some my love for sci-fi, and some really intense, kind of messed up dreams that I have
Mhm.
on a fairly regular basis. I don't know if you've ever had sleep paralysis before, but it's terrifying. And I experience it on a fairly regular basis. And I wanted to use that for something. So I ended up incorporating that into the story to almost add like a little bit of a cosmic horror theme
Mhm.
to it. And you only catch a glimpse of it in the most recent comic, but the next comic that comes out, you're going to get to see it a little bit more. Um, so yeah, as far as how this kind of all came together, in my previous job, I was flying all the time. I was on a plane 5 days a week, some weeks. And so that left me with a lot of time. And when I had basically reached the end of my watch list on Netflix and whatever other streaming services I was diving deep into, um, I kind of just realized I was wasting a lot of time. So about 6 months into my tenure at this company, I just I started writing on the plane. And the first time I tried it, because I haven't, at the time I hadn't written anything other than a professional email in over a decade. Um, I got on the plane. I said, all right, well, let's just kind of see where this goes. I had like a little bit of an idea, and I just said, let's see what happens. And I got off that long flight, and I was on chapter 4, and I was like, whoa, this is this is something new. When you don't have a creative outlet for so long, it kind of pours out of you once you get back to it. So then I started taking it a little bit more serious because I was like, all right, well, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to really do it. I get into things like that. That's just kind of my personality. So I started storyboarding this, and a lot of the questions that came up. Uh, well, Let's put it like this. I started with what are the themes I want to write about, and I kind of fleshed those out, and then I said, all right, well, who are the characters? Well, if there's characters and there's this entire society, you know, um, this multi-planetary advanced society in space, well, there's bound to be some factions, some different government factions, maybe some gang factions, maybe some different types of establishments that are there. So I started fleshing those out. And by the time I had yeah, I mean, I still haven't answered all the questions, but by the time basically finished answering some of the questions that just popped up in the beginning, I had like 40 tabs in Excel that were just documenting everything in this universe. Um, Even down to like the fauna on the planet that it takes place on. You'll discover that Roman Matthews, the protagonist, is kind of he's an expert in, I guess, some of the basically the untamed expanses beyond the city limits of Kyrus. And Kyrus is the mega city that is basically the only real inhabited portion of the planet by humans. Outside of that, it's all just wild alien beasts. So he gets confronted with a lot of these creatures, these alien, often dangerous creatures on the planet during these missions that he's going on.
What I think is fascinating is that because there is so expansive, there is so much going on. How do you sort of find the discipline to take all these elements and then focus it all in one story? Because I would think, for most folks, they would sort of just go off and do this and then something else would come up, but you sort of put this all together into a linear story.
I feel like creating the framework really helped with that. Just doing that from the get-go really kind of helped me. It defined the boundaries. It defined a lot of what was going on in that world. And that certainly helped me stick to the story. Um, but I will say this, the story is multi-narrative, the book at least. So you are following a number of different characters from all walks of life. You follow a few politicians, you get a feel for the political turmoil that's brewing in the background between the planets. You follow some really interesting characters. You follow a physicist. You follow an intergalactic pop star who's touring from planet to planet with her posse. She's kind of got a finger in everything. And I guess it was just I really have a good defined vision for what I want the main narrative to be. So all of the other things are basically just end up feeding into that main narrative. And you get to watch all of their storylines intertwine throughout the book. As far as the comic is concerned, right now, I've got a lot of freedom with the comic because not only is the comic going to follow the same narrative of the book for the protagonist, for Roman Matthews, who once again, he's kind of a roughneck freelancer. He's doing basically a mercenary. He's doing odd jobs for local gangs. Um, that narrative is going to be followed throughout the extent of the book, but then the I'm also going to follow him as an adult before the book starts, where we're going to basically watch him go on a number of different missions for all sorts of characters, which is going to allow me to really continue to build the world and introduce readers to different parts of the world and how varied it can be, and really how rough uh, it can be, and how just what life on planet Diorum is like, because they're under the rule of an authoritarian regime, which is called the Coalition for Prosperity,
Mhm.
which with authoritarian regimes, as far as they go, I'm sure you can imagine they're not really all about prosperity, kind of a misnomer. But that part of the narrative, the time before the book, where he's going on random missions, there is going to be a little bit of a defined narrative to that as well, but that is going to be going backward in time. So if we've got kind of a timeline here, we're going to have episodes going in two directions. The one moving forward is going to be the one that is basically following the story from the book. It's going to be the adaptation of the book's narrative. The one going backward is going to be all the stuff that has yet to be written. So that's been a lot of fun for me, planning and working that out with my illustrator and my colorist. Big shout out to them, by the way. My illustrator is Francisco Nilo. He's out of Argentina. Been phenomenally talented, and same goes for my colorist Chandran Panusami, who's out of India.
Wow. When you have all these characters, how do you start? Because, each one has a certain, I don't know, attitude. They have a way of speaking. They have a physical look. They have an outlook on the world. How do you start to blueprint and put them together?
That's been a lot of fun for me, actually. Funny enough, I've actually based a number of the characters that the story follows on people that I know in real life. Um, and some of them I know, intimately. Some of them are just people that I've met in my travels who have inspired me in some form or fashion. Um, but yeah, I feel like that really adds an extra breath of life into the character because if you know the person or you've interacted with that person on a meaningful level, you kind of have a feel for how they would respond in certain circumstances. And once again, it makes it much easier for me to write about a character if they have a basis in something that's real in my life at least. And that really has helped just the different personalities delineate from each other and really flow. Um, and I try and keep a lot of the events relatively fluid so that I can keep the writing real and with respect to the characters. Um, there are certain major events that are hardwired into the story, and I'm working towards those, but how we end up getting there, I mean, that's anyone's guess. I usually have an outline, but that often changes. I kind of keep it fluid. I keep it open to changes throughout the writing process.
Have you noticed in yourself the characters changing from how you started them to where they are now as the story's gone, that maybe took turns that you didn't expect?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, at least for the protagonist, I mean, the his narrative is really kind of centered around his growth now. Um, Not just as a person, but as I don't want to give away too much, but as kind of the leader. He's kind of forced into leadership due to the circumstances that he undergoes um, in the book. You won't see that probably for a few one or two episodes of the comic, but there are some big changes that end up happening in his life that really take him down not only a path of growth and rediscovery of purpose, but a really dark path. Um, the story itself is it's dark. It's not your cozy fireside read. It's not always a happy ending. It's a dark story.
Do you see any characters as sort of, I don't want to say breakout characters, but have the ability to spin off into books or stories of their own?
100%. In the most recent issue that came out, so it was episode two.
Mm,
It's called The Job. Roman gets kind of reunited with kind of a mentor figure from his past.
mm,
Um, and that character's name is Modus Magni. and he's basically he runs a number of legitimate businesses that are meant to basically hide the fact that he operates a militia on, off the books. Um, very interesting character, and I've already started doing a little bit of storyboarding for a potential offshoot with him, just because I found that, as the story progressed, he was such an interesting character, not just to me, but, to a lot of the people who have read the book and, made comments and given feedback. He seems to be he's a character who people want to know more about. And it's no surprise. He's just as much of a badass as Roman is. And he's a lot of fun. He's got a very crass way about him, but he's there's a humorous element to the way that he talks,
Mhm.
but he is like really all business.
Right.
Um, and I'd like to see, how that character I'd like to dive a little deeper into his origin story, so to speak, because I have the broad strokes of it now, but I'd like to dive into get into the weeds with him.
When you're creating a hero and then you're creating a villain, is it two different mindsets? Do you have to sort of try to think of characteristics of each that sort of not matches but fits in with each other so that makes sense that they would not be on the same page?
You know what's funny? As I was writing this and kind of evaluating both characters, I actually realized that both the protagonist and the main antagonist in my book had relatively similar trauma.
Okay.
So obviously two kind of coming from two different walks of life in terms of status, but relatively similar trauma.
Okay.
And that actually stuck out to me specifically as interesting because it really is kind of how you deal with the trauma from your past that kind of forms you and the decisions that you make and not just solely the environment.
Mm.
Because I mean, when you meet Roman as well, I don't want to give that away because that's going to be coming out in one of the next couple of comic issues. But the actually no, that's all right. So Roman, you first meet Roman in the book as a teenager, so you get to see his upbringing, and he is raised with a moral compass, and he doesn't come from, you know, like a terribly poor family or anything, but he obviously tragedy strikes, and a number of events basically harden him into the mercenary that he is when you meet him as an adult, and the person that you follow through the majority of the book. Um, the antagonist, interestingly enough, is the son. When he experiences his trauma, he's the son of the overseer of the Coalition for Prosperity, who is it's basically the highest seat in the government. And his trauma basically forms him, and he just becomes a cold-hearted son of a bitch from it. Um, I think the difference is I guess between the two characters is the morals that were instilled from, um, I guess either sets of parents and just the way they decided to deal with it and the decisions that they made following, what they went through.
Right.
Um, yeah, yeah, that did stick out to me. It's funny you brought that up because that's a great question, and that is something that I've pondered, especially as I, work toward bringing the second book to a close.
Gotcha. Jumping a little bit to a business aspect, your website is phenomenal. And what really blew me
Okay.
away is, it not only tells about the stories, but then you have videos, then you have a playlist of music that goes with it. I mean, it's sort of an all-in-one place. And it shows how much time and effort has been put into creating this world. Talk to me a little bit about why it was so important to have so many elements for this project.
Well, I told you, all right, I really get into things. I
Yeah.
really get into stuff when I put my mind to it. Um, yeah, so the playlist that's on there, that's actually the music, or at least the lion's share of the music that I listened to when I wrote the book. And I I'm exploring, like I mentioned, some pretty dark themes, some pretty heavy stuff. So a lot of the music is meant to match those themes because while I'm listening to this music, at some point while I'm writing, it kind of turns to white noise. And what I find is that I'm left with just kind of the feeling that the music instills as I'm going. And I feel like that really helps me to craft and create the entirety of the book's feel. Same with the comic book as well. Because I write the scripts. I don't do the art. I try and relay exactly what I'm looking for to my illustrator and my colorist, and they're, like I said, incredibly talented. It's like they pull it out of my head um, when they actually deliver the finished product. But it's important to me because I don't plan on just stopping at books and comic books. I'm a like I said, I've always been a huge fan of films and video games. I'm a huge, well, I don't have the time now lately, um, just with everything that I've got going on, trying to bring this to fruition. But, I love sci-fi video games and sci-fi films and space opera and just all that whole genre. Um, really was kind of it just kind of it took me even at a young age, and I want to eventually move Vitalerium into every outlet of media that I possibly can. You're gonna have to give me a few years on the film and the video game part, but it is something that I'm actively working towards with kind of each step that I take. That's why I went from the book to the comic book. The
Right.
book allowed me to flesh out my ideas in long form. The
Mhm.
comic book, you know, shows you a picture of it. If a picture says 1,000 words, now we actually have a kind of the next stage of the story's introduction.
Mhm.
And I think my next step after this will be creating a short animated film, somewhere between 5 and 15 minutes long.
Mhm.
Uh, More for like proof of concept and for marketing and to really show what I'm looking to do with this series. Um, but I rendered all the characters and the maps and everything in 3D for a reason. I love I miss it,
Mhm.
but I love getting engrossed in a good sci-fi game with a really solid story. I love that. But the problem is then I'll be sitting in front of that for hours, and I'm not going to be getting a whole lot done. So
I'd say it also seems like it could lend itself to like a card role-playing game because you have all these characters, you have all these worlds and all this other stuff that sort of fits exactly into what folks would be looking for and something like that as well.
yeah, it's a possibility, and I've thought a little bit about that too.
Mhm.
I'm not really sure how I would design something like that. I'd probably have to, I'd have to have a whole period of time where I really dive deep into some of the other games that are out there to see once again, what are people doing? What do people like?
Right.
What types of games? And yeah, but that would be fun. That would be fun.
What were you looking for in an artist and the colorist for this project? I mean, was there a certain style that you had in mind, or you just sort of talked to a few different people and saw what they offered and said, okay, this seems like it works best for my words?
It's funny. The first artist that I talked to was my artist.
Okay.
Um, I was introduced to him through a mutual friend that we had.
Mhm.
Uh, they had worked together on a previous project, and he said you got to work with Francisco. He's very talented, and he said he'll be able to kind of adapt his style to what you're looking for.
Mhm.
And I said okay, and I had to sit down with Francisco, and God, this would have been a while ago now. Not quite a year, but almost. And he basically felt I explained to him what I was looking for, which was I explained that the story was dark It's meant to be like a grungy cyberpunk kind of future, advanced tech, interesting things. I want to bring some unique things to life that, we haven't seen in other comics as far as technology is concerned. I want to, we need to be able to go back and forth on some of that stuff. And he basically was just said, "Hey, look, I'm confident I can do this." And I've always wanted to do sci-fi. And that's actually what stuck out to me the most was he was like, I really, like, I'm excited about this. And I was like, okay, he's got the passion for this. Like our kind of passions met up there. And I was like, all right, this is the guy who's really gonna put his all into this. And he delivered. Um, so he is actually, funny enough, he's the one who kind of taught me how to write a comic script because that was something that was new
Right.
to me at the time as well. I'd kind of gotten the book thing down. I was like, all right, I have a vague idea of how to do that now. And then comic script writing was entirely new. So um, he basically kind of showed me how to do it, and that I felt was like really great practice for other steps down the line because you're literally describing where you want the camera angle, looking at the scene from, the color schemes, the what the characters are wearing, um, any specific motions or positions that they're in, and it's I like to say when you're writing a book, you're writing more because you're describing everything in kind of long form in a way that flows well. But you're providing so much information in such a short span with some of these with comic scripts because if you really want it to, match your vision, you've got to be very specific. So that was a fun process. And I know I kind of went on a tangent there. Did I
No,
answer
no,
your
no.
question?
It brought it up, but the question is, my question for you is, like, how much from the book is in the comic? Like, how much, were there certain conversations that were in the book that you said, I just sort of have to leave this there and not put in the comic? Or were you able to just sort of move everything you had into the comic? How did you sort of edit yourself?
I definitely had to cut down some of the dialogue. You know, I like uh kind of showing the reader who the character is through their dialogue as well as their actions. But there are definitely, I mean, if you're trying to fit things into panels on a comic book sized piece of paper, it's tougher to have some of those longer diatribes in there. And honestly, it kind of takes away from some of the artwork, if I'm being frank. So I definitely had to learn how to uh, defer to brevity
Mhm.
on those, at least in comic book form. And there are certain scenes that I had to contract as well, um, just for the flow of the comic to make sure that people weren't like, all right, this is the same. Yep, we get it. He's doing that. Yep, we get it. What comes next? I didn't want to like bog people down in one particular scene. And yeah, that has been an interesting process. The other thing is for the time being, we're only following, like I said, the protagonist. In the book, you may follow the protagonist for 2 chapters, and then the next chapter you're following someone else on the other side of this city. And having that element it's not something that I mean, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, it's not out of the realm of possibility to include that in future comics.
Right.
See, now you've got me thinking.
There you go.
I, but I had planned to have character offshoots that follow similar trajectories to the book, but also allow those characters to be introduced to the main narrative for the comic book as well. Um, Once again, allowing me to dive a little bit deeper into who those characters are and what their backstory is. But I've got a pretty extensive canon planned for the series, and it includes character offshoots, different time periods. Um, like I said, it's spin-offs, entire spin-offs with different characters, and yeah, ultimately following, ultimately leading to Roman's narrative, which is, if I were to describe the entire story arc, because I have 7 books planned.
Right.
Um, you're basically watching the emergence of a future mythological hero.
Okay.
So basically, the origin story of the person who becomes the most important person in future history.
Hmm.
Um, so there's a lot of trials and tribulations. It's almost like a futuristic odyssey of
Okay.
sorts. Yeah.
Business wise, it's a very crowded market right now in comics with a lot of independent writers and creators putting things out there. What are you learning and how are you sort of separating yourself from them to get eyes on your book, to get attention on your book?
That's I mean, you're kind of always constantly learning new things in that realm. I mean, a lot of it is trial and error.
Mhm.
Uh, I feel like this entire endeavor has been a one gigantic trial and error experiment almost. I've found that, I guess for me at least, I've had a lot of good feedback and good experiences going to different Comic Cons
Mhm.
and different conventions like that. There seems to be a lot of overlap with, the Comic Con folks and the sci-fi genre in general. And so this content seems to speak to people at these events. And honestly, I've had a lot of fun just getting to interact with people and just having some face-to-face time with the community. And I feel like that's definitely helping the word to spread. Um, as far as like real into the weeds business stuff, um, I try different things. I try ads, I try book giveaways, I try uh different sales and things like that when it comes to, my books and my comic books. Um, and then other than that, my my real goal is just to stay focused on building the body of work into everything that it can be, because eventually, that small grassroots following is going to continue to build and spread. And as long as I continue putting out good content that I'm happy with, knowing how much of a perfectionist that I can be
Right.
and how tough I can be on my own work,
Mhm.
um, it'll continue to grow. And that's my goal. It's just to continue to focus on the body of work and grow this thing into what it can be.
I say, because you brought up a part that I think people don't realize that there's a hustle involved. It's going to the shows, it's going to the comic shops, the bookstores. It's time it's your time, it's your money getting out there to do all this. It just doesn't come to you. How do you sort of balance all of that and then also finding time to sit down and do the work that's needed to get these books out?
Um, I am still tweaking that balance. I feel like it's also an ever-changing balance. It depends on what you need in in whatever time it is you find yourself. I've got a good friend of mine who, funny enough, I based one of the characters on.
Mhm.
Um, Entrepreneur, very, very smart guy, and he recommended early on that I take on what he calls the just-in-time method, which is basically, what do I need to do right now that is the most important to achieving my final goal or improving my basically my product as a whole. Um, so it basically means that you're constantly reevaluating, what needs to be done next and doing it as soon as possible, without getting bogged down too much with, some of the little things that some people, I mean, you can get obsessed with.
Right.
Um, you could get obsessed with, logging in every day and checking to see if there's a new review or,
Mhm.
uh, you know, hyper focusing on sales tracking and, did this do anything? I mean, sales tracking is important, to see if what you're doing is effective in terms of marketing. But, you know, if you obsess too much over, these little things, you'll never have time for, or I would never have time to continue putting out the next book or the next piece that needs to, which is, it, funny enough, I asked this author once, I said, what's the best way to sell more books? He says, write more books. Is keep putting more content out. And I thought that was kind of funny. And uh they're not wrong. So the obviously the more content that I have, the more, I've got a book and two comics and another three comics in production right now. It's that the more things I put out, the more things I'm able to basically get out into the market.
Mhm.
And certain things are going to attract certain people, and certain people are going to be attracted to different things. That's why I didn't just do a physical book. I did an audio book as well. I did, some people like to read on Kindle. I made sure that there was a Kindle version of my book available, or a digital version. Some people like to collect. That's why I created a limited edition version of my book, which I'm only printing 500 copies of, and then I discontinued that line. That's it. And each progressive book will also have its own limited edition. That's why I'm doing variant comic covers now and experimenting with where you can appeal to the different types of buyers and people out there, the different types of fans, the more people that you can attract to your work.
And we're back. I'm telling you, the creativity there to come up with all these different, themes and ideas and the smallest details he's thinking of for this project and this story and this world they're creating. Vitalerium is it's going to be huge, and it is huge, and it's going to keep growing and growing. And it's obvious that Nick has the creativity and the work drive to get it done. And we just want to keep up with him to see how this is going, because it's just, I'm fascinated by people who are this creative, and he's definitely fits that mold. So, Nick, thank you so much for joining us. I'd love to have you back. Guys, thank you so much for joining us this week. We are off next week. There will be no shows next week. We're taking some time off, but we will be back in September with a whole slate of wonderful guests for you, of course. And guys, don't forget, our Patreon is there. Check us out. Dollar Bandits for Patreon. Support us. There's all sorts of great things that can come your way for backing us. We know you guys support us, by listening, and so please spread the word. Continue to do that. Help our numbers grow. Have a wonderful weekend, and we will see you guys in September.